Hello! So recently I made a guide on optimizing in TFT and how to get the most out of your final boards and different ways to spike your boards in order to try and win out with different comms. In that guide I did allude to the fact that there would be a part 2 where I talk about the actual traits themselves and playing deeper into the traits and how that can affect the units on the board. So what we're going to do today, it's going to be maybe a little bit boring, but we're going to do a brief overview of pretty much every single trait. I'm going to go through as many of them as I think are super relevant in the current meta and talk about like how deep do you want to play, what effect does it have on the units, and how you optimize the board playing around each of the traits and the different carries associated with that trait. If you do like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. It does help me as a small content creator. We're actually very close to 7,000 subs. Hopefully we can hit it by the end of the set. Additionally, on my channel, if you want, what I'm going to be talking about today is going to be kind of like an abridged version of this playlist, which is just how to play. So over the course of the set, I've basically gone through almost every single trait and talked about how to play around it, itemizing the carries, and building your board from early game into final board. So if that's something you're interested in, there's a playlist for you there. Most of my content is guide content like this, as well as more general guides like I'm doing today. So if that appeals to you, make sure to like and subscribe. You can also support me through members, and I have an online store with some merch as well as art because I do art on the side. So now, without much further ado, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try and make timestamps. I know everybody always asks me for timestamps. I'm spending a lot more time on this video just prepping and stuff, so hopefully it'll be timestamps. But we're going to go in alphabetical order in case I don't have time to do it. So, starting now, Academy. So, when you're playing around Academy, let's just get the Academy units. When you're playing around Academy, you usually try and aim to get to around 4 Academy and play around the Academy items. So whatever your Academy items are dictate who's going to be your main carry if you're playing around Academy, as well as how you're going to optimize your board. But typically, your board is going to end up something like this. Now, whenever you're playing Academy, it synergizes really well with Sentinels, so you typically will play around Sentinels as your front line. This is your typical Academy board. Something that looks like this. And then you could play deeper into the frontline synergies, right? You could play deeper into Sentinel and deeper into Academy. Now, typically you don't try and hit 5 Academy unless you have like an emblem, or if the sponsored items are really good and they're essential for itemizing your carries. A lot of times you'll drop the Lux and you'll only play 3 Academy because you need a little bit of extra room to play another really good unit, which is Corki. Typically, your early and mid game, once you hit your first board, you're going to try and play around Heimerdinger and Ezreal. As soon as you have a Corki, the Corki is going to outperform the Ezreal typically. You want to build, if you're playing Academy, as many versions of these sponsored items as possible, because the sponsored items that you get still provide damage amp if you make duplicates. So if you make duplicates of the Academy items, you can then put them on multiple carries. This works really well with Academy when you have AD items. Like for example, if the sponsored item is an IE, you can make an IE for Corki, and you can make an IE for Jace. It's almost always going to be better to itemize towards Jace 2-star at the end of the game, but a lot of times you're going to itemize towards Heimer to stabilize your mid game, Corki to stabilize your mid game, and then Jace eventually. Now, if you do have an Academy emblem, there is a worthwhile reason to play 5 and 6 Academy, and that's the fact that it gives additional HP as well as damage amp that can cap your board really high. A lot of times you're not going to be able to hit 6 Sentinel unless you have an emblem, so this isn't a realistic board, but a lot of times you can keep Rebel active by holding onto the Irelia. Late game, because you want to keep Leona and you want to put in Rumble, if you don't have like the space for it, a lot of times you drop Rebel late game because your front line's stable enough if you have upgraded Rumble, and you can play around the Scrap Shield as well, so you kind of compensate for the lack of Rebel HP. And a lot of times you're not itemizing the Ezreal because you're moving items onto Jace and Corki, so things like that, that's how things usually work out. Now, in terms of perfect items, I'm not going to go over that because we're doing this a little bit more general, but if you have an Academy emblem, this is the important part. With an Academy emblem, you usually want to put on a frontline unit. You don't really want to put it too much on a backline unit. I think the better holders is somebody like Rumble, for example. The reason Academy is so good on a frontline unit is because if you play deep into Academy, you get a bunch of HP by giving the Rumble the sponsored items. So the Rumble gets the damage amp, which allows him to do a massive amount of damage, and then you get the HP, which with Sentinels makes him extremely tanky. And a lot of times if you have Academy emblem on Rumble, he's going to be the primary damage dealer, and he's going to do most of the damage on the board. A way you can look at it is that, let's say you have 6 Academy. I'll do like a rough math for you just in general of why it's so good on a frontline unit, right? Let's say you get a board like this on level 9, you have an Academy emblem, so you play into 6 Academy. This is a typical optimization if you have an Academy emblem, because if you read what happens is Academy units holding sponsored items gain double the amount, plus additional 5% health and damage amp. So if you look at 6 Academy, you get 9% per Academy item that you're holding. You get 9% HP and 9% damage amp. So if you put on a frontline unit, you're basically going to get double that, so around 20% HP per Academy item that you put on the unit. So if you put 2 Academy items on the Rumble, he's going to get like 40 damage amp and 40% HP. It's such an absurd amount of stats that you can make use of both of them by having the unit in the front line. Additionally, like frontline Jace for that reason can sometimes work out really well, but a lot of times backline Jace does more damage, and you can usually transfer the items a little bit more easily because you're not really building melee items here. You're usually building like backline AD items that you can then transfer onto the Jace. But if you're trying to optimize the board, it's usually Academy Emblem on a front line. You want to cap out around Rumble 2, Jace 2, and then switch over and play around the 5 cost. If you don't have an Academy Emblem, I would recommend just playing around 4 Academy. It's a little bit bait sometimes to play deeper into one side, and it's also bait, you know, to play deeper into Sentinel without a Sentinel emblem. This is typically what your board's going to look like, and then your spare spot could turn into like an extra Rebel unit that you can just play like a Jinx, or it's usually just going to be reserved for a 6 cost, and you just play the 6 cost. Okay, that's Academy. Next, Automata. So for Automata, there's basically 2 main ways that you play around it. So if you read the Automata trait, the Automata trait caps out really high around 6 Automata. So if you're trying to play around Automata and you have an Automata spat, the greatest way to spike these boards is to play towards 6 Automata. 6 Automata, if you read the difference in damage, right? So like they do this Automata blast, which makes like a huge amount of damage. 4 Automata is 400 damage. 6 Automata is 1200 damage. It's absurdly strong. So a lot of times you just want these units to attack as many times as possible and to launch these crystals as many times as possible and do this burst damage. So 6 Automata is typically the way to go. If you don't have an Automata emblem, then you're obviously going to be playing around 4 Automata. If you have an Automata emblem, then you're typically going to be going for a build around Kog'Maw. So sometimes you can carry a Kog'Maw 2-star, because of how much Automata damage you have if you hit the early Malzahar, but often you're going to try and stabilize around a Kog'Maw 3-star. The Kog'Maw 3-star, you're basically just going to want a bunch of attack speed because he's going to proc the Automata blast very aggressively. So a lot of times it's like Gwynsu and Shiv, just because your whole board is doing Automata blast, so you want the Shiv to spread shredding as much as possible to maximize that damage. Now, if you're playing around Kog'Maw carry, Sniper isn't too important, but a lot of times you're going to be playing around this board and you're just going to try and build some sort of front line. It's very flexible because a lot of times you just have a lot of open spots. So typically you'll play something like a bunch of extra 3 costs that synergize with the board. You'll play and stabilize around something like this where you can just put in Zeri for Firelight and then Watcher with the Scar. Additionally, you can also play deeper into the Watcher trait just to make sure that your front line is super stable to support this Kog'Maw, and you can end up with a board that looks something like this that you can cap out around with your 6 Automata. You can also get a Visionary in if you want to for Malzahar, if you have items for Malzahar, but typically you're just trying to 3-star front line, 3-star back line, and work around this. Often when you're 6 Automata, you get so much armor and MR as well that you can often fast 9 or tempo towards just playing around high cost units as well, right? Then you can just go for Malzahar 2 and you go for like 2-star frontline units like Rumble and Mordekaiser and other units that can work really well. The highest cap, obviously, one of the best holders of this is 6 cost, but Automata Mel is particularly busted because of the synergy that she has with her casting and the damage that she does. Now, that's typically saying if you have an Automata emblem. If you don't have an Automata emblem, you can play around Kog'Maw, and then it becomes very similar to like a Kog'Maw Zeri Sniper. So when you're playing like just around this, you typically don't even play 4 Automata if you don't have the emblem. And if you're playing Kog'Maw carry, you just want to play your 4 to 6 Watcher frontline just to make the Kog'Maw ramp up as much as possible. Now, typically, if you see Automata and you're trying to play around Automata units, the other variation is that you play around Quick Strikers, which we'll talk about Quick Strikers a little bit more after because there are a couple variations. But this is like primary carry Nocturne if you're rerolling for Nocturne 3-star. So if you're rolling for Nocturne 3-star, you want to have 4 Automata in, so a lot of times these are the Automata units that you want. You're trying to 3-star one of the frontline units, either a Mumu or Blitzcrank, just to have some extra frontline for yourself. So a lot of times it's something like this, you 3-star these 2 units. The most important thing for Nocturne is 4 Quick Striker. 2 Quick Striker, whatever. 3 Quick Striker, whatever. 4 Quick Striker is essential. If you're playing around Quick Strikers, reroll, either TF, Nocturne, or Akali, you need to have 4 Quick Striker in. If you ever decide to drop out of 4 Quick Striker, you are actively throwing. It is not ever 3 Quick Striker. It might not seem like it's that big of a deal. We'll talk about it a little bit after because there's a lot to talk about with Quick Striker. But the dashing to targets and the attack speed and the shielding is all essential to make the board pop off. So you lose a lot from not playing 4 Quick Striker if you're playing these melee frontline carries. So a lot of times you're going to try and go for a Akali 3-star because it's efficient rolling for 2 costs. And then you can also, like, you know, of course you can cap out around 3-starring everybody, but a lot of times you're just going to 3-star Akali, 3-star Nocturne, and 3-star some sort of frontline tank. Even a Mumu 3, if you don't have enough gold for Blitzcrank 3, is fine. And your board's going to look something like this, which would cap out around level 7, and then on level 8 you can play a 6 cost or some other synergy to help out your board, like a random Mordekaiser if you have Blitzcrank 3 might be good, or a random Sniper if you have this guy 3, or a random Enforcer if you have Twisted Fate 3. Like a lot of times, like if you have Twisted Fate upgraded, you can just play like a Caitlyn. You get Sniper on these two, but that's only in like these really weird encounters where you have like a lot of these units 3-starred that you can actually make this effective. But usually extra frontline doesn't hurt. Obviously Ornn artifacts. This is something that works a lot with Ornn artifacts. If you have like ranged, like something like Fishbones, this is typically what you want to do. You want to have 4 Automata in, so you get the Automata blast damage, and you get the extra tankiness on your units, and you want a 4 Quick Striker in, you need it. You need the 4 Quick Striker. It's just so much, it's so much damage. It's like a lot of times you'll play Quick Strikers, you'll hit your 3-stars, and until you have the Mbessa, you're not stable. It's very obviously you need 4 Quick Striker in. If you're playing just melee Nocturne, which I think is a little bit weaker in these type of setups, just make sure not to build Titans. I think most of the items are okay. Usually you just want to build for like pure damage, so I like Hodge, IE. You have so much tankiness from Automata, the trait, in terms of the armor that it gives you. You don't want to build like tankiness stuff, like Sterix is usually for survivability. Edge of Knight sometimes can get you out of a bad spot, so Edge of Knight's not bad. But like something like a Titans is just horrible. You should never, like, you know, a lot of times people build Titans on Nocturne in these setups. You have the armor from your trait, you get so little value off of it. You want to just go for like as much damage as possible, and you want to burst them down as fast as possible. So like, you know, full crit, full damage amp, things like that are going to work out a lot better. So Banished Mage we won't have to talk about because it's just a 6 cost. Blood Hunter we don't have to talk about. Black Rose we're going to talk about later, so I'm going to skip over it. And the same with Chem Baron. Chem Baron is like a way of optimizing boards, and you kind of just play towards it. There's not like a perfect Chem Baron build. I'm going to talk about the units themselves in other situations, and then I'll just make an amendment like all the Chem Baron units. If you play Chem Baron, then you can play around that. Let's talk about Conqueror right now. So Conqueror is usually played in many different ways. I would not play Conqueror without a Conqueror +1. So Conqueror doesn't really function well unless it's Conqueror like 6 Conqueror, right? Getting the cash outs, I made the Conqueror guide a while ago, but basically the way Conqueror works, a lot of times the way you can think of it is that if you get to the 330 Conqueror cash out, that's basically your top 4 win condition. That's like, now I'm going to get at least 4th and probably 1st. You need to get to 330. Now to get to 330, you basically have to have 4 Conqueror in for the entire game, and on stage 5, you'll get your 330 cash out. That's like a rough estimation. Obviously, if you have 6 Conqueror, it comes a little bit faster, or it can come a little bit more on tempo if you don't start with 4 Conqueror. But a Conqueror emblem is really essential for that reason, because not only does it help you to hit 6 Conqueror early to guarantee you getting that massive cash out, but if you have a Conqueror emblem and you have 6 Conqueror and you get the cash out, then whatever 6 cost that you, or sorry, whatever 5 cost that you hit, so I'm just going to put them all in the board, you can see there's a lot of synergies. Conqueror is a really nicely designed trait because it's supposed to be this tempo, aggressive, level, be strong, play around, max cap style of board, like feast or famine type of win trait, right? And they made it really nice that it's synergized with pretty much all of them. The only ones that don't fit in really nicely are Jinx and Caitlyn, but sometimes you even end up playing Caitlyn because you have Martial Law, which can sometimes synergize with these boards. But besides that, every other 5 cost can synergize and slot itself into the board very nicely because they have synergies that work with the board. So basically, whatever 5 cost you get on your cash out, it doesn't have to be a Mordekaiser, it can be anybody. You just slap the Conqueror emblem on them because you're just going to have a bunch of base stats that you just give to a 2-star 5 cost, and that's going to be your new damage dealer that's going to absolutely destroy everybody. It's insane. The Conqueror emblem has so much value on 5 cost that's part of the reason why you shouldn't really play Conqueror unless you have the Conqueror emblem. Because the problem without the Conqueror emblem, to play 6 Conqueror, like, who cares about this guy and who cares about this guy unless you have them 3-star upgraded? They don't do anything, right? Like, this Draven isn't going to be your max carry unless he's 3-starred and you have some sort of crazy situation. But how are you rerolling and playing around this if you don't have them? Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense is what I'm trying to say. Now, in terms of your board, usually you're carrying around Mbessa. It helps because you have so much base stats to give her, like, pure damage. A lot of times, Edge of Night is always good on her because she dives the backline. I personally like to build IE Hodge, but you can debate and talk about different builds. It doesn't really matter all that much because with Conqueror, it kind of just comes down to, do I have enough stacks that Mbessa is Giga strong? And if she is, she wins, right? That's basically how it comes. When you're playing around 6 Conqueror, you need at least 1 Quick Striker, and you don't have to play 4 Quick Striker because a lot of the units are kind of useless if you're not rerolling them, right? Like Nocturne and Akali are just going to die instantly, so a lot of times you play Twisted Fate, and then the rest of your board can just come together in terms of whatever flexible options you hit. You can play into Form Swapper and play 4 Form Swapper, you can play a Sentinel to synergize with the Rel, you can play a Pit Fighter to synergize with the Draven. A lot of times I end up just going for something that looks something like, you know, something like this, and then I swap out for 5 costs eventually. Dominator is not super important on Mordekaiser because Mordekaiser's most of his damage happens as soon as he does his first cast. He's not like a chain caster. He casts, he enters his empowered state, and he starts slamming his hammer everywhere and just beating up everybody. The Conqueror bonus isn't that important. You never really have to play Conqueror if you're playing... the Dominator bonus is not important because the extra AP that you gain from the first cast that you do is pretty irrelevant based on whatever items you have. And then, like, you know, obviously you need, like, QSS on him. So a lot of times if you're playing around Mbessa, that's why a lot of times, like, early game, make sure, like, if you're planning to play around Conqueror, QSS on Mbessa is pretty good. Because not only are good Mbessa items, you can eventually transfer it onto the Mordekaiser. And late game, a 2-star Mordekaiser with a bunch of Conqueror stacks is going to be your strongest way to cap out the board. Emissary. So Emissary is very similar to Conqueror, but it's very hard to play. I wouldn't necessarily angle myself towards Emissary all the time, but there's many different variations of Emissary. So the main thing about Emissary that you want is you want to have some sort of 5 cost to buff with all of these Emissary bonuses. If you're playing around Mbessa with Emissary, that's usually what your carry ends up being. Sometimes you can play around Tristana, which we'll talk about after, but Emissary is like a core that you can build around other traits. So there is Emissary Sorks, there is Emissary Mbessa, there's Emissary Tristana, but it's very like, you know, open. The old way of playing around Emissary, if you're just playing like, I'm just going to play Emissary, was that you would just shove in a bunch of units that are 4 cost that have a lot of synergies with the rest of your board that could help realize the potential of that board. So it looked like something like this, and then you would play the extra Form Swappers, and then a TF. So, of course, if you're playing this board, a lot of times you were dual carrying between Mbessa and Corki, right? So making an IE was good because it can work on both of them. This is a very strong Corki build. It's one of the highest cap Corki builds that you can have because basically Corki benefits from the 4 Emissary bonus. And Mbessa has a bunch of bonus because she not only gets the 4 Emissary bonus, she also gets an extra bit of HP and damage amp because she is an Emissary unit herself. So with these type of builds, a lot of times Edge of Night plus other damage items on Mbessa is good, and then Corki you want to go for full crit build, something like this. But this is like one of many ways to play around Emissaries. If you're playing around Mbessa carry, you always need to have a Twisted Fate in. This is a board that fits in really nicely on level 9. So if you can't play it on level 9, you have to drop one of these two, whichever one feels like it's less important. You need to have, or Vi, but you need to have, like one of these 3 has to be dropped, basically, for Quick Striker. You always need a Quick Striker, at least 1 Quick Striker on Mbessa, or she does nothing. Trust me. If you don't have Quick Striker, you need 1 Quick Striker. You don't need 4 Quick Striker. If you're playing Mbessa carry, you need at least 1 Quick Striker activated, or the unit is pathetic. That's just the way it is. It's time and time again. It's necessary. So that's how you would build around this. And then obviously, if you can level, you play a 6 cost. Enforcers. So Enforcers, when you're playing around Enforcers, there's basically 2 variations: one with an emblem and one without an emblem. So for Enforcers, you always want to play 6 Enforcer. This is really important. When you're playing Enforcer, the Enforcer procs are massive, and you want to try and get those procs as soon as possible. 2 Enforcer does nothing, right? You can look at 2 Enforcer and you can say, oh, it's 12% HP and it's 12% damage amp. Surely that's good. It's like you need the Enforcer procs to happen early in a fight. If the Enforcer proc happens early, you win the fight. That's basically how it goes. If you ever watch somebody play Enforcers, or if you yourself play Enforcers, a lot of the way the fight goes is, do I get my Enforcer proc within the first couple seconds of the fight? If the answer is yes, then all your units start popping off and they do an insane amount of damage. Enforcer, obviously, you need a Caitlyn till your late game in order to get like your guaranteed top 4, but a lot of times you can actually do pretty well without a Caitlyn in your mid game sometimes, but it really depends on having a Vi 2. Vi 2 is really important to the comp, and you probably can't really level or go 9 or fast 9 if you don't have a Vi 2. If you don't have a Vi 2, you're rolling for Vi. Now, let's talk about 6 Enforcer. So 6 Enforcer is really strong because not only does it allow you to get the Enforcer procs early, well, sorry, let me explain a little bit better. So I'm talking about Enforcer procs, really necessary for the board. So you want to position your units in order to get the Enforcer proc. You want to play 6 Enforcer because not only does it give you a massive amount of stats, it also allows it to be a lot easier for you to get your Enforcer proc in the first place. Because sometimes you can't get the Enforcer proc because if you only have like, you know, 2 or 4 Enforcer in, the units that you have to kill are going to be the highest HP units. It's going to take too long to get rid of those units. You want there to be like as many units, like 4, as for example 6 and 8 Enforcer. When they have 4 and 5 units on the board that are wanted, one of those 4 units is going to be a shit unit that's easy to build, or sorry, easy to kill, because they won't have a full build on them. That's the idea why higher levels in Enforcer are super important, in addition to giving a bunch of stats. So you always want to play 6 Enforcer. You want to try and position in such a way that you kill off one of the shitters. You don't want to get stuck on a main tank, right? Like if you're Enforcer and you're playing against 7 Black Rows, you don't want all your Enforcers targeting the Scion. You want all your Enforcers to target one of the shit units that's easy to kill, get the Enforcer proc, and then pop off. Now, this comp works really well with 5 cost. If you're trying to optimize it, you play around the 5 cost. A lot of times you drop Camille, and then you just play Savika and Rumble, plus whatever other units you can fit in. This is only 8 units, but a lot of times you play something like this, and you can fit as many 5 costs as you see fit, because you just want to try and boost the amount of damage. Somebody who works really well with this comp and can sometimes be a dual carry is also Mbessa. Mbessa, the Emissary bonus for her is quite good because she just gives everybody armor. You get like an HP shield from the Enforcer trait, so most of your units have a shield. You get armor, it just increases their general tankiness, and because you're relying on Vi to be your damage dealer and your front line, you want her to be as tanky as possible, but also have as much damage as possible. So this is typically what you build. Vi items are very situational, of course, but you usually try and build her either towards like a max damage if you think you can burst down your opponent. So like Hodge IE can work out really well on her. But a lot of times you'll see her in a more tank build where you'll build her with like Bloodthirster, Starex, like Titans. Like, you know, like the full, like I'm a melee tank and I'm gonna drain tank and cast and do a bunch of damage. That also works with her. I personally usually just try and make an IE. I think IE is fine, like IE Hodge, and then eventually you can move the IE onto the Caitlyn. You can put mana items on it on the Twisted Fate, and then eventually move it on to the Caitlyn as well, and that's going to be your max cap to play around the Caitlyn. If you have 8 Enforcer, it's always play 8 Enforcer. Good holders of Enforcer emblems are any upgraded 5 cost. 6 cost, Warwick Enforcer emblem is busted, of course, and you can easily transfer the items over to him, but a lot of times if you're playing a similar board, you'll just play it with the Mbessa. Additionally, you can try and find anybody that synergizes. If you have an Enforcer emblem, you should be prepared to play pretty much anything. So for example, you can play Echo with Enforcer emblem, because you have Ambusher synergy. If you have like a Bruiser or a Sentinel synergy, like if you have a Rumble, if you have Quick Striker with the Mbessa, basically anybody that you can fit in, you can put the Enforcer emblem on. What I wouldn't suggest doing when you're playing around Vertical Enforcer is playing Vertical Sniper as well. It seems really tempting that, oh yeah, I can just play this, and then on level 9, I can just put in a bunch of extra snipers and like, play Twitch and like Zeri or something, and this will be really cool and amazing. What ends up happening is a lot of times you lack the front line to sustain this. Your Vi gets bursted down, and then you lose anyways, because the Caitlyn, she takes a little bit of time to pop off, even with the 4 sniper, and a lot of times you don't have item builds for the rest of the units. If you're playing around snipers, we'll talk about it a little bit later, you want to compensate for like, this is like too much damage, not enough front line, so to speak. So typically you're just going to play around your Enforcer units, as I showed you before, and 5 costs to synergize with those Enforcer units. Experiment. So Experiment is kind of weird. I don't think there is any more a reroll experiment variation around Urgot. I don't think that this unit is worth rerolling, especially within experiment. But of course you can try it out. Maybe the buffs, I'm not out of touch, and maybe the buffs that they did in the B patch are a little bit better than I'm anticipating they are. But I wouldn't recommend it. So typically when you see experiment, or if you're trying to play around experiment, you're trying to play around Twitch. There's many different variations to play around Twitch, but if we're talking about experiment in particular, a lot of times you usually cap out with just 3 experiment. The only time you really want to go for 5 experiment is if you have an emblem, or if you feel like you have enough damage and in terms of like your front line, and it doesn't warrant playing the shitter units. That's the main thing, right? With experiment, the 5 experiment bonus isn't big enough for you to say this is always what I play to cap out this board as 5 experiment. It's like, it's very situational. Like maybe if you have Dumbify, you can play 5 experiment. If you have like really good augments that help your tank, you have a good situation. If you have like a Giga Broken Tank Anomaly, maybe you can play 5 experiment. But a lot of times you're just playing these shit units to get like a little bit of extra damage on Twitch. So most of the time you're going to drop them and play just 3 experiment. You always want experiment bonus whoever your main tank is, which is usually Mundo. So you have experiment bonus on Mundo and experiment bonus on Twitch. Now, like I said before, if you can get an extra experiment bonus, you usually use the Urgot, because the Urgot gives attack speed as well as the health shield, so it works well for both your tank as well as the backline Twitch. When you're playing around experiment, you just try and do like a 5-cost soup. It's hard to make this board work with 4 snipers, so a lot of times if you're playing towards experiment, you're playing just 2 sniper, and you're trying to fit in as many synergies as possible with a bunch of 5 costs. So a lot of times you cap out your board really high by swapping in all of the 5 cost units to be like the main offensive units, right? So your board typically is built around this core of 3, and then you find synergies that work with them. A lot of times your max cap is like a backline Jace 2, a backline Caitlyn 2, then you can play Vi, you can play Mordekaiser, and just slot in as many of these powerful frontline 5 costs and backline 5 costs. You can also play Jace in the front line to compensate for some damage. And then if you're particularly a high roll, then once you have a stable front line like this with all of these huge threats that stun and stall time, then you can put some extra backline users if you want to help out with that. The other way to play experiment is just with vertical bruiser. I'm not going to put in all the units, but if you have a bruiser emblem, it's pretty much locked behind having a bruiser emblem. So unless you get one, but if you do, then you can just play 6 bruiser with the Twitch in the back line. So that's typically how you optimize it. This one's really flexible with 5 costs. You typically are aiming for 5 costs. Of course, if you hit a Warwick, then you can play 5 experiment, because the Warwick is going to compensate by being not only a frontline unit, but also giving an extra experiment bonus. So then you can play this and you just find like an Urgot that you can swap in for somebody else. And then you experiment bonus on the Mundo, the Twitch, and the Warwick. And then the Warwick can maybe pop off with the extra experiment bonuses. So that's another way to cap out your board. But a lot of times you're really trying to just stabilize around Twitch 2-star and Caitlyn 2-star when you're playing around experiment. Family. So family, there's a lot of different ways to optimize or play around the board. So let's just start by putting in family. And so I'm just double checking my notes. Family. Typically you're going for these 3 units. Now, when you're rerolling, you're always going to be rerolling on level 4, level 5, looking for full copies of these units. Now, if you can, you 3-star everybody, but it's not essential. Right? If we're going in terms of priority, I'll put them in terms of priority of who you want to 3-star. A lot of times it's Violet, Draven, depending on which one you have items for. Then after that, it's Vander, then Powder, then Draven. But these two, like, you know, it's like tiers, right? People set it up like this, right? So first row, the ones that matter the most is Violet and Draven. The ones that matter the second most are Vander and Powder. And the one that matters the least is Darius. Basically, when you're playing around these builds, if you're playing around Violet, then here, I'm just gonna un-3-star everybody, because these ones don't really matter a lot. Obviously your max cap is a 3-star everybody, but if you high roll and you hit a Violet 3 and a Draven 3, you can usually move on. Now, there's 2 different variations to play around. If you're playing primary Violet carry, like if you're playing Violet as your main carry, meaning that you prioritize and your best items are on the Violet, which looks something like, I'm not sure what the best items are on her, but it's something like, let's just put Drain Tank build for now. This isn't the perfect items. I talk about it a lot more in detail in Family Guide. But let's say your items look like this and you don't have Draven items. Then the way that you usually optimize this is by playing vertical. Sorry, I'm going to put Draven up here. By playing vertical Pit Fighter. You basically just try and push levels until you can find a Savika. and then you just play 6 Pit Fighter with the family bonus. So the 6 Pit Fighter, it just gives her a lot of Omnivamp, and it's actually really substantial. There's a huge spike from 4 to 6 Pit Fighter, so the HP that you get for general tankiness, as well as the damage, the true damage that you get, is really substantial. It synergizes with the 2 most important units on your board, which is Violet and Draven. And then additionally, if you have like a Vi 2 and a Savika 2, these units also in their own right do a lot of damage and could often out DPS your 3-star. So it actually scales really well into late game, but it's really depend on basically finding a Savika at one point. And a lot of times you'll build a board like this. And this is usually how you optimize it. In any extra levels or any extra space, you can play Emissary or a 6 cost. Now, if you are a primary Draven carry, however, Draven is a Guinsoo user, and you're trying to like make him stack up his damage as fast as possible with these Guinsoos. So a lot of times, if you want to stabilize a little bit earlier and not have to rely on the Savika, I'm not sure which is the highest cap variation, but a lot of times you can play deeper into the Watcher trait just to give you a little bit more sustain. And you can also play Echo when you play deeper into the Watcher trait, because you get Firelight activated with Scar, and then you have an outlet for AP items. So this is a little bit more of a flexible option. It's something that works a little bit more, I don't know how to describe it. It works a bit more cleanly with like itemizations and stuff like that. Basically, the idea is that, oh, sorry, I need a Garen. Whoop. Basically, the idea is that you play 4 Watcher. What am I duplicating? This guy. You play 4 Watcher, so you have a lot more frontline. The Echo also serves a little bit as the frontline. It's a perfect synergy board. And what helps is that because you have more frontline just in terms of less damage dealers and more like tanks, you can help the Draven ramp up a little bit more easily. And when he ramps up, he'll do a bunch of damage. And of course, you can still level and play Pit Fighters, but this board fits really nicely because if you have a bunch of AP items, so for example, like let's say you have like, I don't know, usually your rods turn into Guinsoos anyway, so it's not that big of a problem. But if you have like a bunch of random AP items, like let's say we have like a spare Rabadons, you have an outlet for that in the form of this Echo. So the Echo has Ambusher active, which is nice, and has Watcher active, or sorry, has Firelight activated, so you actually can work out pretty nicely some extra DPS to stabilize your board. But of course, this is like, you know, if you don't have Violet items, if you have Violet items and Draven items, you want to just activate Pit Fighter because it benefits both of them. This one's not as great for Violet because she becomes a lot less tanky without all the frontline benefits of being a Pit Fighter. However, if you think about Draven, he doesn't benefit from like the extra Omnivamp from Pit Fighter. It's just the true damage, so he doesn't get as much value from Pit Fighter, which is why it's often a little bit better to play around Watcher. Now obviously there was nerfs to this line, so it might not be as broken, but this was the go-to way to optimize. And then you can just level for a 6 cost, or you can level for extra Pit Fighter if you have the ability to get to the next threshold, which is 4 Pit Fighter. That's family. Firelight. So Firelight you never really play vertically, so we're not going to talk about Firelight in particular. You never like start the game off and say this is a 3 Firelight game. A lot of times if you're committing towards Firelight, you're playing around Zeri, which we'll talk about when we get to snipers. Savika and Rumble we don't really care about, and Victor we don't care about, so let's talk about Rebel. So Rebel. When you're playing Rebel, you always want to activate 7 Rebel. Rebel is pretty strong in your early and mid game, but in order to keep up with late game boards, you almost always want to have 7 Rebel in. If you don't have 7 Rebel in, you don't benefit from the stun that Rebel gives. This 2-second stun that Rebel has is massive. It's very important. It often is critical for a lot of your units because your units in your backline, especially Zoe and Jinx, take a while to do damage sometimes. Like Zoe, she has burst damage, yes, but without having vertical Sorkin, her burst damage is a little bit less. So without the Rebel 2-second stun, sometimes she's just like, you know, kind of a little bit lackluster in terms of her one-shot potential. And Jinx, she can one-shot everybody, but sometimes if she doesn't get her cast off soon enough, sometimes the fight's already over by the time she casts, and then it's too late. So you really want to make sure that your Jinx has time. So the 7 Rebel is really important. When you're playing around this board, it's a lot better with a +1, obviously, but you can fit it in really nicely. You want to synergize with some extra frontline or extra, like, tankiness. So a lot of times Elise just fits in really nicely because you have Inter-Team Sentinel, and then you get Bruiser in for free. Something that's critical to optimizing this board is Echo a lot of the time. You want to have Ambusher in for Jinx because this Jinx has to one-shot. Now, even if you have, like, Jinx with an IE, I would recommend just always putting Ambusher in. You want to make Jinx not only have a 100% crit chance, but you want to do like, you basically want to do, if the Jinx one-shots everybody with her ult, you win the fight. If she doesn't one-shot everybody, then you lose the fight. That's kind of the way Rebel works. So it doesn't hurt to put in Ambusher. That's a really good optimization, but of course you can play around 6 costs as well. And a lot of times with Jinx, you want to build her with full damage. You want every item on her has to be damage and then 1 mana generation. So blue buff is typically your better mana generation, but you know, let's just put Shojin for fun here. So like if you're building her, like i.e. Guardbreaker is a good build. Guardbreaker is really great because you can also have it on Zoe up until you need to move it on to Jinx later. But the idea is that you need her to have 100% crit, you need her to crit on her ult, you need her to have maximum amount of crit damage because every extra crit chance that you have above 100 converts into more crit damage. And you want her to have damage amp if possible. She has a bunch of stats because of Rebel. She has base stats like base AD and base AP. You can always give her more base AP and base AD because that transfers to more damage if you already have the crit multiplier, so that works out really nicely. But a lot of times you go for a build like this. Rebel is essential to have a Jinx a lot of times in order to top 4, so you really want to play this comp a little bit from ahead in order to hit it. Obviously, a Rebel emblem helps you because it helps you to stabilize. You can play a little bit more flexibly around some other units. But typically, what you want to do is you want to be really stable around your Zoe. So you usually have to build Zoe items and then hopefully have items for Jinx later. You can't just say to yourself, I'm going to build Jinx items because then you're just playing a 1st or 8th. But if you're trying to optimize, yes, you do need Jinx items more primarily. Like the Zoe does nothing late game, and it basically just comes down to, does my Jinx 2-star kill everybody? And if she does, you win the game. That's basically how Rebel is. You really need 7 Rebel in. You can't really play anything besides 7 Rebel. Even Ambusher with Jinx, you don't, like 5 Ambusher Jinx is not as potent as like 5 Rebel. Because like the 5 Ambusher Jinx, she doesn't have the base stats that you get from Rebel in order to pop her off like really hard. So if you have a Jinx, you always want to play 7 Rebel. Makes sense? Hopefully it makes sense. And then, of course, you can cap out really high with 6 cost. Victor works really well with the Rebel board. I would say more so than any other board. Like, Victor sometimes feels a little bit mid, even though he's, like, really broken with the stun. It's just got a lot of nerfs, so he doesn't, like, do as much anymore in terms of utility. But the stun with the Rebel stun, basically the Rebel stun goes off, and then the Victor stun goes off. You remove the opponents from the fight for, like, so many seconds. Like, it's so long, the amount of time that you're, like, pausing the fight, that often it's very much a win con to have a Victor with the Rebel stun, because like the amount of stun that you get makes it so that your Jinx rocket, sometimes you even get 2 rockets off, and if they don't, if you're not one-shotting with 1 rocket, you're sure as hell one-shotting with 2 rockets. It's just that it stalls out the fight for like a good period of time, that it actually works really well. It's just chain CC. So so always consider Victor here. Even more so than some of the other ones. I think Victor is better than Mel. Maybe it's arguable if Warwick is better because Warwick's fucking busted. But, like, you know what I mean? I think that, like, if you had to pick one, Victor, because of the chain stun, I find to be the more successful option. But, of course, all of them are good. Scrap. So, with Scrap, you always want to play 6 Scrap. So, when you're playing Scrap, you always play 6 Scrap. You never play less than 6 Scrap if you're trying to play Scrap carries or vertical Scrap. So why is 6 Scrap so important? 6 Scrap makes it so your items are lucky. Not only does it give you a lot of shield, it makes it so your item is lucky. Now Scrap, this one you should definitely watch the Scrap guide on a little bit. I spent a lot of time talking about it. And I also made a lot of other guides on Scrap from me playing it, like VOD reviews. Scrap is a little bit difficult to be successful with sometimes, especially since they nerfed it, and then they buffed it, and then they nerfed it, and then they buffed it. It's hard to keep track of, but the main thing with Scrap is your item quality. With Scrap, if you do not have good items, this trait will suck. You will not be successful. You will go bot 4. Your item quality is everything. So you have to have a good understanding of not only what items you're making, but also the components. And that's where 6 Scrap comes into play. You want to make sure that every single unit on your board, this board is like a sum of its parts, right? If you ever look at the damage dealt by your units at the end of a Scrap fight, a lot of times it's like almost an even split between Gangplank, Echo, and Corki, and Rumble. Like all 4 of these units, like until like Anomaly, maybe if one of them has an Anomaly, they pop off harder. But most of the time, all 4 of these units do like close to the same amount of damage. So if you want to maximize the damage by Scrap, you want to take advantage of the fact that it gives you a bunch of extra items to use your components to itemize 4, 5, 6 carries on your team in order to actually be a threat. That's the way Scrap works. So it might look like, oh, you know, I just put one item here, GG, call it a day. It's like, no, you're going to go bot 4. The item quality matters so much. That's why a lot of times with Scrap, people lose streak into playing Scrap. The reason they do that, because you need to guarantee not only one good set of items, but you have to guarantee like 2 or 3 good sets of items to work with multiple carries. Now, Why does that come into play with scrap? With scrap, what you should always do in order to optimize it, this is my recommendation, you always want to hold on to 2 tiers and 2 belts. You don't want to make belt items. You don't want to make tier items right away. You could if you want to, but hold on to these like they're your virginity. And you know what I mean? Like, or whatever the expression is. Maybe some of you don't do that, but I did. But you know what I mean? The idea is that you need to hold on to these components as long as possible. Why? Because a tier on Echo will always turn into a Hand of Justice. Right? A tier on Rumble will always turn into a Hand of Justice. A belt on Corki will always turn into a guard breaker. And a belt on this guy will always turn into a guard breaker. You care about the consistency. Why do you care about the consistency? Because it allows you to make a full trio of proper items. Whenever you make items, you want your 3 items to synergize with each other the best that they can in order to amplify the damage as well as possible. That's just how it is. That's TFT. So you could just put any components. There are other components you can put on the units, but I want to stress it very clearly. You want to build with the intention of these being your items, and then you can build a full set of 3 items that synergize really well with the unit. So now assume that you have these proper components, right? Hodge is really good on echoes because you know for sure now that you have Omnivamp and healing. So your other items could be more related to damage. And just amplifying that. So a lot of times you could put a Rabadons on him. You can even put a JG if you want to try and get him like that massive 100% crit chance, or you can give him some survivability like some other mana gen. Rumble, you always want to pair it with like crit because you have crit glove item with Hand of Justice, synergizes, increases your crit chance with Jewel Gauntlet, which makes his ult crit, and his ult critting is really massive for Rumble because he basically just explodes and kills everybody. Corki, you know that you're going to be building around crit with the guard breaker, so you want to maximize that, i.e. make the ult crit. Gangplank you can also build for full crit because he also gets damage amp from Form Swapper. The extra units that you play are pretty flexible. A lot of times people will play around Vi to get Pit Fighter in, and Elise that gives you synergy with Bruiser. You can also play a Sentinel in the form of Alawi to synergize with the Rumble, but a lot of times you're just playing like this. You have so much frontline because of scrap, you never want to make tank items with scrap. If you look at the itemizations that I have here, I'm not making tank items, right? What you want to make is you want to make damage items, then you want to make armor shred and magic resist, armor sundering and magic shred. So you want to make items that then reduce the total damage. Reduce the total resistances of your opponent to maximize your damage. It's all about maximizing damage, right? You want utility, Shred and Sunder. You have anti-heal with Powder and Rumble, but it's not good anti-heal. Eventually, you want to make proper anti-heal, so eventually you can put that on Gangplank, either a Morello or a red buff. You don't want to make tank items, right? You don't want to make Sunfire and then play Scrap. You don't want to make Gargoyle and then play Scrap. You don't want to make these items because you have so much frontline because of Scrap. Scrap gives you this massive amount of health shield. You're going to be tanky. You're going to have tankiness. The way to optimize is you want pure DPS on everybody. You want the Rumble to do a shit ton of damage, Echo to do a shit ton of damage, Corki to do a shit ton of damage, and Gangplank to do a shit ton of damage. You can also play deeper into Form Swapper. You can play other 5 costs. You can play 6 costs. There's many different ways to do this. Also, if you have Ambusher or synergies, like if you have like Reunion or stuff like that, you can play deeper into itemizing the Vi. You can play, you can itemize other units, of course, and you can play deeper into Ambusher if you really need to. But you have to make sure that you prioritize having good items. What I always recommend is grabbing a bunch of gloves on carousel, because you're going to be making a bunch of crit items usually, right? You're going to want to make JG. You're going to want to make IE. You can make another IE. So glove items on carousel. You can make a Last Whisper. You want to make as many damage items as you can, and then avoid making tank items to compensate, to make sure that you're even. That's the way to play Scrap. If you're not playing Scrap like that, then you're gonna go bot 4. And if you don't go bot 4 and you made a bunch of tank items and you're gonna say in my comments, I made like triple Gargoyle Rumble, it's like, yeah, okay, good for you. Like, I don't care. It's not, you gotta make damage. You gotta make damage. Ambusher. So Ambusher is weird, but Ambusher usually rerolling. Ambusher, it used to be like kind of more balanced towards like whatever you hit. But a lot of times now, it really comes down to Smeech 3-star and Echo 2-star. So you're often rerolling on level 7. Now Smeech, you usually he does so much burst damage that you usually just build him with double damage. But double healing. But a lot of times with all of your units, you try and prioritize making Hand of Justice. Hand of Justice works well on everybody, so you can never go wrong with Hand of Justice. It gives them a little bit of crit chance, and also it gives them a lot of Omnivamp as well as damage, right? It's not just pure Omnivamp. It gives a good amount of damage as well. With ambushers, you want base damage because their abilities will crit, so you want to try and stack that into more damage later. So you just want to give as many base stats as possible. So if you're thinking about like builds with these units, a lot of times with a Smeech, he runs around and he heals so much, so you just give him Bloodthirster and Hodge. And then his last item, I think, is usually like Titans. Like, I used to think Sterix was okay, but it's not. Trust me, Sterix is pretty fucking shit on him. I've not gotten close to bot 4ing with Sterix enough times to know that I shouldn't put Sterix on him. Put Titans. It just gives him a lot of stats, right? It gives him the damage, attack damage and ability power, as well as the resistances, armor, and MR, which is all really powerful. So that's usually how you build him. Echo, you just want to build him with as much base stats as possible. So a lot of times, like, you know, this is where your Rabadons comes into play. Just like bang a Rabadons and he just like absolutely deletes people. Jinx is kind of fake in Vertical Ambusher because she doesn't have that many base stats unless you can build her like a bunch of Death Blades. So like, I wouldn't recommend necessarily playing around Jinx or Powder in these type of setups. Powder, the only time you can really play around Powder is if you have something, or Jinx, is if you have something like a Mana Zane. If you have a Mana Zane, you end up playing around Ambushers. Both of this is really good on them because it can allow them to cast multiple times, especially if you go for like reroll Powder. If you have, like, for example, like worth the weight Powder, I'm just giving a scenario, right, that I've seen before. If you have like worth the weight Powder, so you have a free Powder 3-star, instead of playing Family and contesting Family and wasting all your gold rolling for that shit, you can then push yourself to 5 Ambusher. You can play 5 Ambusher Powder, and you can play like mana casting Powder that just does a shit ton of damage as well. Typically, the way that you optimize the board, you don't have enough gold to like go to level 7 and 3-star everybody and hit everything. So a lot of times you're just playing this board, and then you're just trying to find synergies that work nicely with your team. Firelight works really good with Echo because he just jumps the backline a lot of times and can delete units. So then with Watcher, you usually just play Garen, get some HP buff on these 2 units, and then you still have some vacancy, right? This is a level 7 board, which is what you're usually be stuck on, rolling for your 3-stars. But a lot of times you can play Enforcer for Camille because it's pretty okay just to help reduce some extra damage. You can play extra Sentinels in order to give your front line a little bit more tankiness. Rumble especially can work well. A lot of times if you're playing Ambushers and you have one of those hero augments like Reunion, you can play the Vi and play around the Vi as well. But 5 Ambusher is basically the most necessity thing ever. So if you ever are playing Ambushers and you have the ability to make an Ambusher emblem, you almost always want to make it. Because Ambushers, if you look at it, most of them are your frontline units, and most of your damage dealers need some level of survivability. 5 Ambusher not only gives them, like, it doesn't give them that much, because it doesn't give them, like, you know, like from 4 to 5, there's not that huge jump in extra damage. There's a little bit more crit chance, but there's not more, like, damage. But there's that second sentence that says also gain 15% durability. This durability is substantial. A lot of times if you don't have 5 Ambusher in, you will feel it. Your units will die a lot sooner than you would think, and you're just going to be sitting there and saying to yourself, I don't get it. Why are my units dying? I don't get it. What's going on here? I don't get it. Like, every time other people play Smeech, it seems like he goes infinite and my Smeech keeps dying. It's because of the durability. The durability is super important. Durability as well as item quality. Build towards damage because you heal more if you do more damage, and with the Ambusher ulting critting, they do a massive amount. Additionally, you can also play this line with Chem Baron, which is a really popular way to play it. So with Chem Baron, a lot of times you'll play Rennie and Singed. Where's Singed? Singed. Boom, Singed. So Rennie, you could just fit in a random bruiser to help your board out. A lot of times you don't end up playing around Scar and this guy because you're going to be going for these units. But a lot of times you can play... Where is it? I'm trying to find the dude. Singed. Did I put him in already? Oh, there he is. He was in the back line. Alright. You can play Chem Baron, and then you can get your Chem Baron cash outs. If you get Chem Baron items that work on Smeech, like the AD ones, Executioner Blade, Flesh Ripper, then you could put them on Smeech. If you get tank ones, you can put them on Rennie. If you get AP ones, you probably just pray to God that you can survive till the next cash out, or you can take them and just put them on Rennie as well. But typically what you go here for is you go for 3-star Rennie and 3-star Smeech, and you basically stack your Chem Baron items on the 2 of them in order to make your board really powerful. Then you usually have to play this guy, so it's nice to just put Sentinel in to give your whole team armor, because that's just beneficial for your team. And you can play like this, and you can put Ambusher Emblem on her as well. You can build her as a damage dealer or as a tank, either or, depending on what items you hit. This is a really common way that you have a Chem Baron open and you cash out like a 200, 300. The timing of it is actually perfect also, because right when you would cash out like a 300 cash out, which gives you 2 items, is right when you are probably going to start rolling for your Smeech. It's like right at the end of stage 3, beginning of stage 4. So you actually get perfect info, you get your items, you could slam your final items, build your carries, and then just roll straight down to 0. Or as deep as you need to, and then upgrade all your units. But that's like an application of Chem Baron in this setup. I've seen people play deeper into Chem Baron and go for like win out conditions with this type of build as well. Additionally, the Chem Baron cash outs also can give you copies of the units and duplicators for the units if you get to like 400, for example. So if you have like a really high roll Chem Baron game, you can actually more easily hit 3-star versions of both these units. So it's something you should always look out for. Artillerist. So Artillerist kind of got axed because Urgot kind of fucking sucks now. I could say that endearingly, but you know what I mean. He's not the greatest, so typically now you're always playing around Tristana. The max cap version of this, I think, is this way. I'm not sure exactly, by the way, if it's this or something slightly different. I think it's not. Okay, I'm just gonna say something. I think it's like this. I'm not 100% sure because obviously things are still a little bit fresh in the stats when it comes to some of these lines, and I don't want to give you guys misinformation. But basically, the highest cap version of Tristana is you play around 4 Emissary. Now this is a very high roll version because you have to play Emissary. Emissary, if you don't know, it's very expensive because you have to find a copy of Garen and a copy of Inbessa and a copy of Nami in order to activate Emissary, because there's no 2 and 3 Emissary. It's either 1 or 4. So if you don't have all of the units active, then you can't play Emissary and you'll lose your Emissary bonuses. So a lot of times if you're rolling for the units and you're trying to stabilize around these units, not only do you have to find a Garen and hopefully hit a Garen 2-star, you also have to find a copy of Inbessa. So you have to, like, if you low roll on any of the units, you then are just holding them all on your bench, waiting to put them in and transition your board. So you have the expensive part of your board that has all of your units. You have your you have your bench waiting to transition into the units, and then you're just in a bad spot. So be really careful. But this is a max cap version a lot of the time. I think you play 4 Watcher because you're usually building Tristana with like a Guinsoo. It's usually Guinsoo, i.e. Gunblade, right? Crit chance with a bunch of stacking AD that she has. And the Watcher frontline makes it so that you have a lot of tankiness, and then you get benefit from having the 4 Emissary bonus. It also gives you damage amp because Tristana herself is an Emissary unit, so the 4 Emissary bonus gives her damage amp, which multiplies her crit chance and her massive amount of AD. So this is definitely one of the higher cap variations. If you're not playing around Watchers, you can actually drop like down to 1 Watcher, and you could play 4 Artillerist, which then you just play the Ezreal and the Corki. Looking for Corki. Oh, no, I'm looking for Urgot. Urgot and the Corki. Usually you play around Corki because Corki is just stronger, but any Artillerist works. For Artillerist, this is just how it's really powerful. If you have 2 Artillerist emblems, this is also the cap out for 6 Artillerist. 6 Artillerist is broken, often game winning, so just be ready for that. But this is like the max cap variation. Then you can just level because of 4 Emissary. You can also level and play an extra unit. If you have extra spots, you can play 4 Artillerist, 4 Emissary, and 4 Watcher. But typically you'll place either this one or the Watcher variation. I personally think the Watcher variation is better, but if your Tristana doesn't have enough stacks, like if you didn't get a lot of stacks with the Tristana, then play 4 Artillerist so she has enough damage, basically. Now, the other thing to keep note of is that you can also play Tristana with Sentinels. Now, some people argue that the Sentinel variation is really shit and you shouldn't play and you should just always play Emissary for playing Tristana. I disagree. I think the Sentinel variation is quite strong. I think that it's just really, really RNG, but it's just a lot less. How do I phrase it? The Sentinel variation is like this. I talked about it in yesterday's video, so if you want to see a playthrough of it, you basically just play 6 Sentinel, and you want to get to 6 Sentinel. You try and 3-star your front line, Leona and Rel if you can. Also, I guess we're just on Pokemon music, but that's fine. With Tristana, you want to stack a lot. If you have enough stacks with this variation, you will be fine. So all you care about is your front line surviving, so that Tristana has enough damage to basically plow through each of the enemies. Ezreal, it synergizes to get Rebel in, but a lot of times you can play deeper into Artillerist. You never want to play 4 Artillerist, 4 Sentinel. The 4 Sentinel is not tanky enough for you to work, for anything to really work, basically. So you just have to be really careful about that. Always play around this. This really relies on your Tristana having a lot of stacks, so it's very easy to bot 4 with a build like this. However, The other build where you play around Emissary is also easy to buff forward because if you never hit your Emissaries, you just die out because you don't have a front line. So this one's more consistent in order to get placements, but it relies a lot harder on your Tristana stacking early game. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. But you basically cap out around 6 Sentinel always. If you have a Sentinel emblem, it helps you. Or an Artillerist emblem, it helps you because then you can play 6 Sentinel, 4 Artillerist on level 9, basically. So that's like your max cap. And then obviously you can play 6 costs or any 5 costs to kind of help out the board. Sometimes like a Jace helps out a lot. Especially in your mid game, getting Academy in is nice. Especially Academy is good if you have Academy emblems that are on Tristana. So let's say your Academy emblem is Guinsoo or IE. You can play Academy in your mid game to get the item on the Tristana, and then additionally you can play in your late game if you have multiple copies of it. But if any of these are Academy items, like the first Academy item, playing around Academy is strong because it gives Tristana damage amp, right? If you make Tristana with an IE, you have a bunch of crit chance, you have a bunch of attack speed, and how do you multiply your damage? Damage amp. If you have all 3 of these, your Tristana is going to do maximum damage, right? If you want to evenly distribute like how much power you're putting into all of these stats, because it will make it so that she's like deleting units. Bruiser is a frontline trait. If you're playing around a line that needs it, you can usually play around 6. Frontline traits are always like this. They're the most stable at their 6 variation, so just play around it. Also, I think the music is a little bit loud. Let's go back here. Dominators. Let's talk about Dominators now. Dominator, you never want to play 6 Dominator. I know it sounds wrong, but Dominator, 6 Dominator is not super important a lot of the time. But when you're playing around Dominators, a lot of it comes down to you tempoing to make it to level 9. When you play around Dominators, it helps to have like the cheap front line that is Black Rose. So you often want to play Black Rose and Garen and play something that looks like this. Cassiopeia is a Dominator and a Black Rose unit, so she synergizes really well. And then you want to cap out your board late game with the Elise. Dominators scale over the fight, so they'll gain more damage as the fight lasts longer, so you benefit from having a lot of frontline. However, 6 Dominator often is really bait because you're better off capping out around multiple 5 costs. For example, you have Form Swapper synergy with Elise. So a lot of times, like let's say we're looking here, if you have like the opportunity to play a Malzahar 2, you should definitely play a Malzahar 2 over some of these extra shit units. So a lot of times, you'll play 4 Black Rose, 4 Dominator, and you can drop, I don't know, in this case I'll drop Mundo, right? This is a lot better because if you have a Malzahar 2-star, he's going to do more damage than you would benefit from playing 6 Dominator. A lot of times with Dominator, you're just trying to find another 5 cost to fit in. If you really can't play anything else, then 6 Dominator obviously is a power spike because your whole board is revolving around playing Dominator, so it's going to help you. If you have an emblem, it makes it a lot easier to hit 6 Dominator, so of course, play around 6 Dominator. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that you can cap out a lot higher by playing like a random Jace, a random Malzahar, or even a random like Rumble in some cases, because you have synergies that can work with them. Now, if you're playing around this board, it typically looks something like this, and you're playing like your 4 Black Rose, 4 Dominator. A lot of times you have Mundo because Mundo is just your 4 cost. Your main tank is always Garen. You want to have your tank items on Garen. Silco is a good backline carry, but Cassiopeia also works really well nowadays. You can also go for 3-star Cassio and 3-star Blitzcrank. I don't really see this line working all that much unless you are in a high roll spot. So this line works really well, like 3-star Blitz, 3-star Cassio, if you pick them up as you're going along. So something that works really nice with Cassio Blitzcrank, for example, I'll try and find the augment just to give you like a little tip. I forget what it's called. It's the prismatic one where you level up and it rolls each time. I'm gonna find it. Shouldn't be too hard to find. Dual purpose. So dual purpose, whenever you buy EXP, reroll your shop. This is one that's really good because it helps you to fast 9. It helps you to get to like a level where you can roll for like these expensive 5 cost and 4 cost units, but it rolls your shop along the way. So this allows you to pick up a lot of copies of Cassio and Blitz. If you have an augment like this, for example, this is where I see Cassio Blitz reroll like really popping off. So it is obvious an optimization. If you can just 3-star units like in the blink of an eye, go ahead and 3-star them. But typically it just doesn't synergize really well. And then you just want attack speed and things that work really well for scaling AP on your back line, and then your front line kind of stabilize. But usually you don't play 4 Dominator, you play upgraded 5 costs here. Sorry, you don't play 6 Dominator, you play upgraded 5 cost, because the benefits from 6 Dominator aren't that great, especially late game. You're better off just having other damage dealers that are really strong. Form Swapper. So a Form Swapper is something you really can't aim towards. The problem with Form Swapper is that you're not really stable. There's no like 3 Form Swapper. So a lot of times it's like you're playing contested units that are often very hard to find, because like they all have 3 synergies. So I made a form swapping guide. So there's no real like optimal form swapper board. A lot of times it's like whatever you can do, you can do. Obviously 3-star Gangplank, 3-star Swain is going to be your best option. And if you have to play around form swapper, if you're like really like, I'm going to play around form swapper because I need to make like a YouTube video on it or something, like I don't know why else you would want to dedicate your beginning of your game to form swapper as opposed to like any other comp. But if that's the case, you usually play with Emissary, and then you cap out around an extra synergy on level 9. And if you can, 3-star both of them. If you can afford to put everybody in the backline, obviously the more backline units you have, the more DPS they will do, as opposed to the frontline counterparts of them. But typically a good balance is Swain frontline, GP, Gangplank backline, just because, and Elise frontline because of the stun. But typically this is something you'll do, and you'll play it with Emissary. If you're playing Emissary, like a lot of times the way Form Swapper is like if you're playing some sort of AD comp and you see a random Jace, you just pivot into carrying Jace and playing for a Form Swapper, and you either play it like this, or play it with Scrap, or play it with something else. Pit Fighter. So Pit Fighter we talked about, you usually only play vertical Pit Fighter with family reroll, but it's very similar to the family reroll board. You basically just play 8 Pit Fighter if you can, or 6 Pit Fighter if you can. There's not really an optimal board for it. It's more of like a plan B kind of board, and I'm not sure, maybe I'll make a guide of it in the future, but I don't feel like getting into it now because it'll just take a lot of time. Quick Striker. We're actually nearing the end, guys. We're nearing the end. So Quick Striker. Quick Striker, we already talked about Nocturne carry in the form of Automata, but typically if you're playing around Quick Strikers, you're usually going for TF and Akali carry. Now, I'm a big fan of Akali carry. Basically, the way this board works is that you usually play it with Sentinel. So you play a Sentinel frontline that synergizes with all of the units that you want to play, and then you try and reroll towards any of the units that you can hit. So for Quick Striker is essential. You need 4 Quick Striker in. I will not stress this enough. If you're playing Quick Strikers and you're playing reroll Quick Striker, you need 4 Quick Striker. If you don't have 4 Quick Striker, you are not going to top 4. It is really bad to play 3 or 2 Quick Striker. You need to cap out on 4 Quick Striker. You need the Mbessa. When you're playing around Akali reroll, a lot of times Akali does really good with like AP damage items. I really like putting like Gunblade QSS and then a damage item like a Guard Breaker or something else. I feel like she sucks with JG. I don't know why. Every time I put JG on her, like Jewel Gauntlet, I don't feel like she does that much damage. I care more about her having attack speed, because like her casting and getting the marks with the shurikens are really important. So I like to have like a QSS on her, just make her like attack really fast, be uninterrupted, and just keep going. And Gunblade as a healing item, I just find usually works really well on her. And then last item, some sort of damage item. These are Rabadons is fine. Twisted Fate, usually you can afford to put an Archangels on him because he kind of pops off, and a Jewel Gauntlet. I'm not sure of the perfect build for him. You can go for more casting, but I think this is a pretty good build. But we're not going to talk specifically about build, because I'm not going through the perfect items in this thing. It's just like a brief overview. I'm just showing items as I pass by. But a lot of times you'll go for a build version that looks like this, where you'll try and 3-star Akali, Loris, and Twisted Fate. You don't really care too much about Nocturne, and this is a level 7 reroll. It is the higher cap version for sure. If you want more consistency, then you can go for like Rel 3, Nocturne 3, and you can reroll on level 6. Right? So you either reroll on level 6, play around Akali main carry, and then TF holds a lot of the support items like Shiv, Morello. Or if you have a spot for it and you think that you can reroll a 3 cost because it's just more expensive and it's harder, this is the higher cap variation. Obviously, the best variation is to hit everything. So you have to decide to yourself, do I want to 3-star Twisted Fate, roll on level 7, and 3-star Loris, or am I rerolling for Akali and I reroll on level 6? It's up to you. Both of them can work out fine. I think this Akali unit, even after nerfs, is still busted. And you want to get in the Sentinels. Irelia's on the board because of Rebel. It helps out the Akali to have the extra HP. Usually don't care too much about Mbessa. When you're thinking about Quick Striker reroll, this is more of an AP comp because you're rerolling Akali and Twisted Fates. You care more about AP. Obviously, late game you could put items on the Embessa, but it's not something that's a priority. But that's typically what you need to do with Quick Striker. Sentinels, same as most front lines, right? You get the max value on 6. So if you can make it to 6, you can play 6 Sentinel. It's going to be tanky. But a lot of times you're just balancing DPS. If you have enough DPS, you can play 4 Sentinel. And if you have enough, you know, but it's basically like all the frontline traits. It is how it is. Sniper. Okay, just 3 left. 3 left. We're almost done. Sniper, there's many different variations. We talked about Twitch with Experiment. So we're not going to go over the Twitch Experiment board anymore. When you're thinking about Sniper, there's basically 2 options mainly. There is the reroll option where you're playing around Zeri reroll. With Zeri reroll, you have 2 different options as well, but a lot of times when you're playing Sniper, the best way to play Sniper is to just play Watchers. If you can fit in 6 Sniper, 6 Watcher, obviously you're going to be at your max cap. But basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to make it to a board where you're balancing the DPS that you have in your front line, in your back line with the tankiness in your front line. So 6 Watcher is massive, 4 Watcher is also good. Now, you either are usually going to end up with a board on level 8 and without any emblems. It's either going to look like this. I'll put them off to the side. It'll either be 6 Watcher with 2 Sniper, or it will be 4 Watcher with 4 Sniper. Now, I do not think you can afford to play 4 Sniper without a Caitlyn. I think that your DPS will lack because a lot of these snipers are auto attackers. So most of them take time to ramp up. So it doesn't synergize very well with having a weak front line. Now, obviously, if you have a spatula, then you can fit in everything on level 9, and then you're extremely strong. So a Watcher emblem does help the board spike significantly because you can just put a Watcher emblem on somebody, and then your level 9 is going to be... Oh, I put the wrong Watcher. I was confused for a second. There we go. You can play like 6 Watcher, 4 Sniper. This is obviously the max cap, but it needs an emblem. Or you need to be level 10, which isn't really going to happen. But you know what I mean. The idea is that if you have enough, depending on the matchups that you have, who you're fighting against, if you need more DPS, you can play around 4 Sniper. If you need more frontline, you play around 6 Watcher. I think both have valid uses. I think if you're playing primarily like a Gwynsu type of board and you're rerolling Zeri, then if you're rerolling Zeri, I would just go for the 6 Watcher because, you know, Zeri with the Gunblade, with the Gwynsu Gunblade, this usually is enough for you to like win out and just be really strong. The max cap is usually to play 4 Sniper, but like I said, until you have the explosive damage of Caitlyn to compensate for this, I would not necessarily play this. Right, and then you just play it like this. Now, there are other variations of it without Watchers, like the Bruiser variation, which is more Twitch focused, Experiment variation, which is more Twitch focused. Often people talk about Sniper with Sentinel variation. That is the worst variation of all of them. So I don't really recommend going for it because if you're in a spot where you're playing snipers and you need to play around sentinels, the chances are there's other snipers players in the lobbies that are all contesting Watchers because most of the comps they contest Watchers are sniper boards. Like, I don't see why you wouldn't play one of the better variations. So I'm not going to recommend it here in this optimization thing. That is a thing you can do, right? So you can play this with Sentinel. It's very high roll because when you play it with Sentinel, the idea is that you really need to have the Caitlyn in because a lot of times you're maxing out this board with 4 Enforcer. Like, this is a very high roll board. It is very strong. Don't get me wrong, right? It's very strong, but it's more of like a board that fits really nicely on level 9. This is like if you have a Caitlyn 2, you win the game, right? That's what this board is. This board is like if you have a Caitlyn 2, this is your way to win the game. Even more so than the other variations because now you just play deeper into the Caitlyn trait and the Caitlyn is just going to fuck up everybody. She's going to 1v9. So this is what that variation is. Like I said before, it's either extremely high roll or you're playing it because you're contested. But if you're contested, you should probably either pivot if you have a bad spot or hold strong because you have the better spot. Because that's the way TFT works. If you have the better spot, then you should outlive and outplay the opponents, and if you have a worse spot, then you're going to be the one that has to pivot anyway. So it's more of like you're either salvaging placements or you're really far ahead. It's whatever. I'll just mention it here because I didn't mention it, and I think I've gotten like 3 comments about it. Like, I'm not sure, I can't remember, so I'm just mentioning it in this video. I've made a little mental note to say it. Sorks, you always want to play 6 Sork. whenever you're trying to play these sorcerer carries. Now, obviously with Zoe, you can play either 7 Rebel or 6 Sorc. LeBlanc, you can often play just as a +1 on the board. But typically when you're playing this, the one that you would drop is Lux. Zyra is busted. A lot of times a Zyra 3-star can be as strong as the other Sorc carries. Zyra 4-star, if you have stuff like Greater Moonlight, is a easy way to like just guarantee, like, because she's only 1 cost on your board, you can take Greater Moonlight and just carry Zyra and win the game off of it. It's actually extremely strong. But typically with Sorcs, to balance the front line, you usually play around Black Rose, just because your front line is kind of lacking, so you can benefit a lot from just playing these units in your front line. And then you have a little bit more stability. Your max cap with Sorcs is to play what's it called, like 5 costs eventually when you level up. You have a little bit of vacant spots. You have a lot of emptiness that you can just play like extra form swappers. You can play 4 form swapper as well to make your front line really juicy and to play around like a Jace 2 if you have it. However, the highest cap variation is to play not into Black Rose, but to play into Emissary. So Emissary, this is usually locked behind a spat because it's harder to stabilize unless you can fast 9. As you can see, there are like 10 units on this board. So a lot of times if you're playing Emissary, you either have to be level 9 without Black Rose, so you lose the Black Rose and you're hoping that you have enough damage. This puts a lot of pressure on you hitting Garen 2 because your front line is pretty shit. So a lot of times the way that you play it is with a Sorc emblem. So if you have a Sorc emblem, a lot of times you'll just put it on an Elise. Let me find an Elise. But until you can get to level 9, a lot of times you put it on basically anybody else just as a temporary holder. But Elise benefits from the AP because she heals. So you play something like this, and it caps out really high on level 9. Because you can get 4 Emissary in as well as 6 Sorc. And then you would drop the Zyra if you have to. You either drop, if you have Zyra 4 or Zyra 3, then you don't have to play Zoe. But typically you'll play around a board that looks like this. A lot of times you can also stabilize around Swain backline carry if you're trying to tempo level, because this also works because you have so much DPS. And because you have the Scion, your front line's a little bit better. But typically you're playing 6 Sorc, 4 Emissary. This is the highest cap version of Sorcs that you would want to play. Visionary. Okay, last one, chat. Last one. God, I hope my DMCA doesn't get... I hope I don't get DMCA'd from this, but we'll see. So, how do you play Visionary? Visionary, there's basically 2 variations. So the first one I'm going to talk about is this one. Alright, so with Visionary, you're usually playing Sentinel with Visionary, or you're playing Black Rose with Visionary. So one variation is Morgana reroll. So you go for 3-star Morgana. Morgana, you really want to have blue buff, Gunblade, and +1 damage item, but usually it's like Jewel Gauntlet, I think. This is the new way of playing around Visionaries, or at least low-cost Visionaries. And the idea is that you're rerolling for Morgana 3, Vex 3, and Singed 3. This is like a 1-cost reroll line, but it's really dependent on finding extra damage later in the game, because it's a little bit more temperamental. It's not as stall heavy as like the previous Renata build. Remember, people used to reroll Renata and then they kind of like deleted her and like made the comp a lot worse. You always want to get to 6 Visionary because of the extra abilities healing that allows this board to sustain itself. So you want to make it to 6 Visionary, you always play 6 Visionary, and you always rush to 6 Visionary. So if you're optimizing this board, you don't care about playing deep into Sentinel. You care about playing 6 Visionary. You need to play 6 Visionary. I'll say it one more time. You need to play 6 Visionary. So a lot of times it looks something like this, and then if you can, like if you have emblems or if you have the ability to level, then you start stacking in all the other Sentinel units. And then you can place, obviously your highest cap is if you have 2 emblems, you can play 6 Visionary, 6 Sentinel, or like, you know, obviously Visionary emblem is really good on Rumble because he gets a mana refund when he misses with his rockets, so then you can just chain cast, which is absolutely absurd. But this is how you typically try and optimize this particular reroll. And then you also get Sentinel synergy. Let me just remove somebody. You get Rebel synergy with the Sentinels and the Vex, so a lot of times you're playing Irelia as well. Like I said, this is very... You need to have a good spot for it. I think this comp is very strong, but it's usually when you get to a point like this. Trying to find it. It's usually when you get to a point like this, where you're able to make it to like a level 9, and you can play 6 Visionary, 4 Sentinel, and you have like a Malzahar to compensate for some extra damage. So the reroll sometimes falls off really hard if you don't have like certain enablers, like You know, some of the augments like Starry Night that you can 3-star everybody easily, or what's the other one? No Scout, no Pivot. Like, this is a comp that's really good with No Scout, no Pivot, because you get so many stats on so many units. You just 3-star everybody because they're all 1 costs, and you can pop off really hard. Now, if you're not playing around this, what you could do is you could play 6 Visionary, and you could just play around this with a Heimerdinger carry instead of playing around the low cost units. Usually when you're playing the Heimerdinger carry, however, you're less likely to play like this type of build. You're more likely to play Black Rose, right? Because you get the Black Rose synergy, and then you just fit in some extra Black Rose units. A lot of times it might be a LeBlanc, or it's going to be another one of the front lines like this, and you can play like a Garen. This board is really expensive, and it's often hard to hit everybody. It's hard to fit in everybody, excuse me, because like obviously there's a lot of units. So usually you only play this variation if you have a Visionary emblem. That would be my recommendation. But of course you can play it however you want. This is just another way. And then your Heimer items, very similar to Morgana items. You want a blue buff, but typically you just want as much damage as possible, because he's going to cast a bunch. So like Guardbreaker JG or even Archangels is good. Optimizing, you always move items over to Malzahar in your late game. Malzahar 2 is going to be your main carry, and you don't have much flexibility in terms of your extra spots, but if your front line is stable enough, you can play a LeBlanc a lot of the time, or a 6 cost if you can so do that. And then you can put this on Elise so that she casts multiple times, but you have a little bit more flexibility on the spaces of your board if you have the Visionary emblem. So you can fit in more synergies that work really nicely. And then Watcher, you play 2, 4, or 6 Watcher based on your spot. Alright, we're done. So I gave you a brief thing, talked about the traits and the units. I think people are asking me for this. It's a longer video. I'll try and put timestamps in it. Thank you for watching. Hopefully it was informative. I know it was a little bit fast. I know that I definitely skipped over a lot of stuff. Like I said, if you want to see the complete guides on any of these things, I have a dedicated 20 to 30 minute guide on each trait. Some of them are a little bit older, right? Like some of them are like a month ago, or like, you know, a little bit older, but they're still relevant, right? It's just a matter of like how good the spot is versus how good the units are now. So for example, like Experiment, I say, you know, it's a little bit weaker. These are the variations. This is how you cap out. The boards are very similar to what's played nowadays. It's just a month ago, snipers weren't as good, so it wasn't as strong. So like, you know, just take it with like a grain of salt. Like Scrap was really bad, then it became really good, then it became really bad. Now it's okay, right? Like it's like, just take it like these are the conditions for it, and then the conditions are less important or not as drastic if the units are either stronger, like they got buffed, or weaker, that they didn't get buffed. You can check out this for more information, but like I said, I just wanted to do this because I mentioned in the optimizations, and I got some comments and questions like, hey, should I put this trait in, or this trait in, or this trait in, or this trait in? So I want to just go over all the traits in a nice little more concise package that you guys can check out. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, and see you. Bye-bye.